Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm Mrs. Happy Catholic and I have 3 guests on today. I'm really excited. We've been wanting to do a women's panel for months and we finally made it happen. And so 2 of these ladies I have interviewed already. One of them is new to us and that would be Cecilia. Hello. So we're glad she could jump in today. And anyway, so let's dive into our little introduction. All you ladies have grown up traditionalist in different places across the country in different circles like SSPX, Resistance, SSPV. So you've got a real blend of experiences and also just lots of people that all your friends and family in traditionalism growing up and or being teachers or anything like that you're also speaking from their experiences and not just your own when we're answering these questions and having these discussions. So I just want people to know that we're really trying to bring a range of experience to this, just representing other women who can't fit on the screen or wouldn't be able to make the video with us at this time, but that they're in our thoughts and our words as well tonight. So in your experience, how are women spoken to or of in sermons and missions in your traditionalist circles?
I feel like they're treated like they should take a back seat almost. Like when for example, like there's a sermon on the family or something like that from the pulpit, the priest seems to speak more directly to the fathers and the men of the parish, and the women take a back seat. And we just kind of sit there and listen. And that's kind of like that's our place. And when it comes to the retreats, again, he is speaking directly to us, but he's speaking more of like how we can be more submissive, how we can, take a back seat to the men or our husbands in our lives.
Yeah. I agree with you. The parish I grew up in, we had so many French priests for some reason that a lot of their sermons were so hard to understand. Anyway, and we talked about that as a family. We had no idea why they were always sending French priests to the US. So a lot of their sermons, we were just like, but on the way home, Mom would be like, so what did you get out of the sermon? It's like, what did you get out of it? But yeah, that was definitely a common theme. Definitely more talking to the men. And of course you'd miss half the sermon too if you had kids, because you were usually the one to take the kids out. So the vestibule was always full of moms with kids in there too. So and actually one of the rules in our parish growing up, I remember, was if you walked out during the sermon, you were not allowed to go back in until they were done. Which I think that was a man and a woman thing, but yeah, they thought they were pretty important. You can go back in.
It was interesting because they did send quite a few French and English priests over to America. But what I found out as I got older was that the submissive woman thing is very American, because the French and English priests would complain about how the women over in Europe did not toe the party line. Like they went to mass with nothing covering their head or in pants. And in fact, one of the priests was talking about how they were continually having to put the dress code up because it would just come down like every week. So It was interesting because once those priests came over to America, it's like they got on this power trip because the women in America were totally different.
I feel like a lot of that though is like fundamentalist Christianity too. A lot of fundamentalist Christianity, like their influence, I feel like came into the society a lot because it was like this huge movement in the 60s and 70s, and like, the SSPX started around the same time, and it kind of just grew together at the same time.
I think that there's just this puritanical overtone in America in general, in a lot of ways. That could be why the extremism of the 50s, 60s, and 70s went on. They were trying to counteract that Puritanism. I think we're going to talk about it later, but nobody, like, parents didn't believe in talking to their children about the birds and the bees, right? Like, that's how
Right.
puritanical they were, thinking that somehow that was going to protect them, their children, and it had the opposite effect.
Yeah. I was just talking to a friend of mine. She was talking about her husband getting the talk from his dad, and he read this book called like Listen Son or something like that. I don't remember what it was called, but anyway, and then they were supposed
I know
to be together.
exactly what book that is.
Oh, and then the mother's one, it was like the mother's talking to their daughter, and it was called Mother's Little Helper or something.
Yes.
Gag. Anyway, so they read the book together, and he's like, by the end of it, he still didn't know really anything about it. And this was supposed to like set him up for life, before he went to school in France in a foreign country, and that was like, okay, I'm kind of like in a more luminous darkness, but I guess that's all I needed to know. And I'm like, well, at least he tried to talk to you about it, because I know that other families would never talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so, can I tell you such a funny story about that book? My cousin, we were all discussing this with one of my cousins one day, and we were all discussing, well, did your parents tell you anything? No. Did your parents tell you anything? No. And he's like, the closest that my dad got to it was he took that little book, because it's sold in every like SSPX bookstore, and he took that little book. It was probably written in the 40s or 50s, something like that. And he took him for a walk, and he's like, we need to pray first. And so they said like 3 Hail Marys. And then the dad started crying, and that was it. They never even got to the book because the dad couldn't handle it. So they went back home. And he's like, yeah, that was the education I got.
So informative.
I remember my mom reading me the book. Like, they're supposed to read you a chapter like every year on your birthday. And my mom would always forget to read the chapters. And so I remember I got like I missed like 5 years, and I got a crash course from like ages 10 through 16 or something like that. And I remember walking out of the room. At that point, I kind of like figured out. We had dogs. I had friends. There was the internet, the whole thing, right? I kind of figured out the birds and the bees. But I just remembered thinking to myself, oh my gosh, that was so confusing and made zero sense. A very common theme, like a term in the book, was the marital embrace. And
it was confusing. It wasn't clear. It was clear as mud.
Yeah.
Both of those books.
I had a friend growing up who literally thought, she was 17 years old. We got into an argument about it. She literally thought that mom and dad gave each other a hug and a kiss, and then God gave them a baby. Like, they're so scared of actually just, saying the words and having an honest conversation with their kids. And
it's really not that hard. It's just,
I mean, I can't say it's not that hard. I mean, it is hard. My 4-year-old asked me a question the other day, and I'm just like, okay. I don't know how to have this conversation yet.
Yeah, but don't you think that's your past?
It is.
Because, I mean, as my kids get older, 4-year-old, you don't have to even give them that much information. They're satisfied with a very simple explanation. But, as my daughters are becoming teens, it's just not that hard. It's like they ask a question and I just honestly answer it, and it's like they're satisfied with that. And it's nice to know that they know, and then I don't feel like I'm lying and hiding something, or that that what mom and dad do is somehow bad, because that's what it seemed like to me growing up in the puritanical hypersexualized culture I did. It was like it's like all these parents were ashamed of what they were doing or something. It's like that's so wrong for them to even have that mentality. It's not a Catholic mentality.
No. Right. No.
What a disservice to our kids to not tell them the truth.
Yeah.
I feel that now. Being in the church.
And it gets them into all kinds of trouble.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Because it's a really, really beautiful thing. And if you grow up with the wrong information and thinking it's disgusting or terrible and going into marriage with that, it's really hard to deal with when you are intimate and trying to have like a really good relationship with that as the foundation of not knowing.
Yes.
We're just thinking it's gross. It's rough. So that's
Yeah.
a whole
Right.
that's a whole
Well,
can
they're
of
kind of
worms.
worms.
Right.
Well, it actually took, like, for me, it took reading theology of the body to actually like really understand the whole, like, the sacredness behind the whole married relationship and like the sexual relationship between a man and his wife. And like I had only read a couple chapters, and I called my husband and I was like almost crying because I was just like they've stolen so much. Like, this is so, it was so beautiful. And it wasn't dirty, it wasn't shameful, it was holy and sacred. And I was just like, why are we hiding this?
Well, and
Why?
Veronica, that's the whole reason that the trads have all of the problems they have, because they
Right.
refuse to accept this beautiful information the church has given us the last 60 years on family and and on the family and marriage. I came to that conclusion as soon as I left the SSPX and started reading all of that as well. It's like, what are you doing, missing out on all of this, this beauty? And it also, it's they're tools for us to use in training our children as well. And we all could have used that growing up in the SSPX.
Right. Doesn't it render you more easily victimizable for sexual abuse too, if you don't understand anything about,
Yes.
your bodily processes and the marital act and stuff, because you're kept in such ignorance about it, it makes you more of a target. And then if you are
100%.
abused, then you have that to heal from, in addition to this weird warped mentality or lack of information, or this sex is bad, sex is a sin.
It's different for both men and women, I think. Like women eventually, a lot of women that I knew, I'm not talking personally because I have a different personal story, but a lot of women kind of looked upon it as like this necessary evil because it's what they were supposed to do to pleasure their husbands, and they owe that marriage debt to their husbands, and if they don't give it to them, it's a sin on their part. And so it really just kind of became this chore for most women, which again just warps the whole idea of Catholic marriage, and that trickles down to the family.
Right.
But I left home when I was I was 18. I was 18. I knew nothing. I didn't know there was such a thing as homosexuals. I didn't know there was such a thing as child abusers. And I left, I went far away. I went to the Midwest, and my family were on the western side of the States. And I mean, now looking back, I'm really horrified that my parents were okay sending me out in the world not knowing anything about any of that. I mean, I was put in, because of my naivete, it's not even on my part. It's like I was still like really watchful. I wouldn't go out to bars or that sort of thing, but I was put in several situations that could have ended very badly because I didn't know certain things. And yeah, like Cece was saying earlier, like such a disservice to your children, not to educate them.
Yeah.
Thinking
I
that
wasn't
you're helping them stay pure or something like that. It's like, yeah, that gets them into problems. Like you were saying, Laura, sexual abusers, they love people who raise their children like that. They're just, primed for the picking. They can so easily groom them, manipulate the parents, manipulate the child, and then eventually abuse them.
which is obviously a huge problem in trad circles. And I think we've all found that out for ourselves.
Yes.
So there's a reason why there's a purity culture around the whole thing. It's just a vicious cycle is what it is.
We've had a number of conversations about this privately and in our videos, and I'm struck by some common themes that keep coming up, like most notably that women are basically understood and feared as objects for sexual pleasure. So hence the need to conceal their feminine shape and not draw attention to themselves. And I've done a video already about Catholic modesty standards and having been kind of invented or misattributed and like held as this universal church law, which is actually not true. But that's really held over you in trad circles, like you're policed about it at church. I'm kind of curious, like, you're told those are basically binding under sin and you're really kind of shamed if you don't follow them carefully. But at church, that's drilled into you. How about at home?
I know for me, it was drilled into me. So it's drilled into us at church, and then when I got home, it was drilled into me at home. And it was always things. It was very odd, Saint so and so said this, and so it's church law. And so I remember a few arguments I would get into with siblings or parents or whatever, and I'd be like, well, the church doesn't actually say that our skirt has to be 8 inches below our knees. I'm like, that's kind of like, that's just what you guys want. And the response was always, it's not what we want, it's what the church wants. Because some random quote they read in an SSPX book about Saint so-and-so said skirts have to be 8 inches below the knees, that meant that was church law. And so, yes, it was like very hammered into us. And like one of the reasons why we had to have our skirts, a certain length is because, our knees couldn't be exposed. Because
my mom did the kneeling down test.
Those knees, oh boy, those knees. Send you straight to hell, Laura.
I'm like, kneel down in the middle of this thrift store? Okay.
Well, and like,
give me it down as much as I could.
No, for real. Like, and I remember like trying on t-shirts in the thrift stores and like pulling the back of them down to make the front of it look higher. Because if it was any lower than like that, no. You had a bunch of like, I'm sure you guys have heard the song Head, Shoulders, Knees, and Toes.
Oh.
The book Dressing with Dignity kind of went into that a lot. And that was another book that SSPX women really, really followed, like very stringent. But there was like a whole list of tests inside that book, to test the length of your shirt, the length of your skirt, how high it is, how long your sleeves are, how tight it is, even down to like the types of material that your clothing was made out of. It was insane. It was nuts.
The lady that wrote that book doesn't even follow her own rules.
Oh, I know. I've seen her.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. I personally think that like it's obviously varying. There's varying degrees of extremism in trad circles. And I don't know that Cece and I were raised in as an extreme family, but we were definitely taught, it was all about private revelation. Like, it's like what Our Lady of Fatima said about the fashions, which again, like it was never even taken into consideration that she may have been talking about the culture as a whole and not clothing, and so they took all of these rules, like they called it Marian modesty.
Yes.
And these were all just kind of rules that were nowhere to be found in any writings from the Pope or church law or anything. But I mean, again, I didn't know that until later on. And so it was like, I was always a good Catholic girl. And so or good, rad trad, I guess. And I obeyed those rules. I mean, the one thing that did kind of irritate me a little bit was like the whole skirt, the slit fiasco, like in the early 2000s, because like some priests really focused in on that. And at that time, like, it wasn't easy to look for clothes online. Like basically what you had was a thrift store or Walmart or something. And at that time, slits were in. And so you had to sew up every single slit, and sometimes you couldn't even walk after you sewed it up. So then you would take up 2 inches because you could have like a 2-inch slit. But anything higher than that, the priest literally had men standing behind people telling him if the women had a slit higher than that, and he would refuse them communion.
Oh
And
my
so
goodness.
that sort of thing happened all the time. And then the next priest that showed up, his thing wasn't slits, it was sleeves. And so the sleeves had to be down to the elbows. So he would refuse women communion who did not after a while, after he, was telling them you have to have sleeves down to your elbows. And so he would refuse them communion if they didn't have sleeves down to the elbows. So it was just always this focus, like almost like this, they had laser like focus on the women constantly about how we were dressing. And I think what that leads to too is like the men looking at the women and going like, you're the reason I'm tempted. You're the reason, like looking at you as if you are the cause of their falling into sin. And again, so the girls take on this guilt, and the men blame the women because they're the reason for them falling into sin. And it causes this vicious cycle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that goes back to the sexual abuse again too, because it's always the victim's fault. Oh, this poor priest, this little girl seduced him. It's not his fault. It's her fault.
Yeah.
She should have had a longer skirt or covered up more. It's never their fault.
And there was a lot of comments even from women. If there was somebody who had been abused, I'm thinking of a specific case where the girls came out when they were teenagers, but they had been being abused since they were 8 years old. And the immediate response was like, what were these girls wearing? Instead of like putting the blame and responsibility for this wicked behavior on the predator, they immediately, the thoughts all were on the girls.
Wow. So that kind of plays into the next question about, is there a more permissive attitude towards men and their sins of impurity in traditionalism, like a double standard kind of?
Totally.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I was told growing up that, women are blamed more because we have higher dignity and we're closer to God and all this stuff. But it was almost expected of a man to fall, which, like, to my mind, is just such a disservice to men, and it's just so degrading.
Wow.
Like, basically, you guys are animals. You can't help yourselves. You have no higher dignity. You aren't close to God. Like, all of that. And it was horrible. But,
what's interesting, Veronica, is that I don't know if you've seen this. Hopefully this isn't a tangent, but I don't know if you've seen online this gal. I think she is called Pearl. Sure, she calls herself Pearly Things. She's like an anti-feminist, but her whole thing is literally enabling men to be animals. Like, men can't help themselves, and so of course, so it's up to the women. And so it's like, it again, feminism is bad, but so is anti-feminism, or the opposite, extreme anti-feminism.
I actually haven't heard of her. I've had like 3 people in the past 2 days mention her, though. There are a couple other people that are very similar to what they've been describing, though, and it's the same thing. It's just this anti-feminism just swinging so far to an extreme that they will say and do anything to like belittle women into serving men, basically. Like, men can't help themselves, we owe them.
Comes back to like, can we just get on the balance beam? Let's just try to veer onto that balance beam, because it's bad on either extreme. Like, they're two sides to the same coin, and it leads to the same sort of trauma and issues and problems for everybody, for both men and women.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. I was just getting ready for this video. I was reading Mulieris Dignitatem by Pope John Paul II. It's really excellent. And I didn't even make it through because it's really long, but I made it through most of it, and it was just packed. And there was a couple passages that just jumped out at me because I was thinking of this subject. And so I'll just read kind of like bits of them because I don't want to, take too long. But he's talking about women in scripture and Jesus' interaction with women. And he talks about the woman caught in adultery. And he says one of the ways in which this inheritance, the inheritance of sin, is expressed is habitual discrimination against women in favor of men. This inheritance is rooted within women, too. From this point of view, the episode of the woman caught in adultery is particularly eloquent. In the end, Jesus says to her, "Do not sin again." But first, he evokes an awareness of sin in the men who accuse her. Is not this woman, for all her sin, above all a confirmation of your own transgressions, of your male injustice, your misdeeds? Jesus seems to say to the accusers. This truth is valid for the whole human race. A woman is left alone, exposed to public opinion with her sin, while behind her sin there lurks a man, a sinner guilty of the other's sin, indeed equally responsible for it. And yet his sin escapes notice. It is passed over in silence. He does not appear to be responsible for the other's sin. Sometimes, forgetting his own sin, he even makes himself the accuser. I was just like,
Boom.
he gets it. He nails it.
Wow.
And that's not all he says.
Powerful. That's very powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, he even goes on to talk about like unwed mothers specifically, how it's like their sin shows, and so they get all this, guilt and stuff poured on them, but the man just sneaks off in the background. Even though, so we're like, women shouldn't abort their babies and all this. And he's like, if a woman aborts her baby, she usually regrets it till the day she dies. And he's like, but don't ever forget that the man is just as much, if not more, responsible than she is for that sin.
Wow. What's interesting about single mothers is that the women in the society, I have a dear friend of mine who got a divorce. She had 3 children, and her husband was abusive to her, to the children. And she realized the day that, her oldest boy stepped in to defend her and got beat, that it wasn't good for her kids to be with him, because her first reaction for years was like, I need to stay with him for the children. And then when she realized it was hurting her kids, she couldn't stay with him. And so they got a divorce. And, you really have to do that kind of for legal purposes in some cases. And he went on, to go do his cheating thing that he'd already been doing for years and years. But she was always looked down upon by people in the SSPX and the SSPX priests, and she was not treated kindly by them. And so they never even take into consideration. So the divorce, she's divorced, so it's automatically her fault again, right? Like, this is the fault of the woman that she's divorced. Why didn't she stay with her husband? She obviously did something right. It was sort of the overall mentality. It didn't really matter what the story was. Another thing I wanted to bring up, I just happened to Google traditional Catholic mindset about women or something like that. Anyway, this Reddit thread came up, and it was kind of fascinating because, again, I wanted to say at the outset of this conversation, like, I realize, or I think we all realize, that what we're talking about is not true for every woman, mother, girl in the trad communities, but it's common enough, based on our own experiences, as well as anecdotal evidence, that it's worth a conversation. And I think a further in-depth examination as to why it is so common. But on Reddit here, I just wanted to read this. This gal called herself ex-traditional Catholic on Reddit. And she just says, in my opinion, there is really no difference between traditionalist Catholicism and Islam when it comes to women. Islam may be a bit more extreme. If the female body is so abhorrent and filthy, then why did God create the female body the way it looks? And what was interesting is that there were 12 comments underneath by other women who have experienced the same thing. So they must have been raised in the trad community, and they all had the same thing to say. Like, yeah, we were made to feel like our bodies were sinful in and of themselves because we had breasts and because we looked pretty. I mean, there's that right there. Just, there's such a serious problem with that.
So that's interesting too, because we've also talked among ourselves about like how breastfeeding is viewed in rad trad circles. Like, okay, so if you're going to be rad trad and you're going to do everything to the nth degree, like you want to do everything right, including like, breastfeeding your baby. That's like really healthy. And, but at the same time, it's not appropriate because it concerns those very inconvenient female organs. And, sometimes people might actually become aware somehow that you're nursing, and they might be totally scandalized. So I don't know. I'm just curious if you guys have, stories or comments to make about that before I show some.
I'm raising my hand right now. I have several stories that will just blow your mind. And then maybe the other girls do too. But two of them immediately came to my mind. And one of them was when I was still kind of fully in the SSPX, although I really hated pretty much everything about them. And I was totally disenchanted. And so like things like this were just really grating on me. But in a small chapel where my husband and I had moved to, because we'd been I was raised in a big parish, went to sort of like a medium-sized SSPX parish, and then we moved to like a mission, what they call a mission church or whatever. And there was a family there, and they all dressed like Laura Ingalls, including the mother. I mean, I'm serious. Like they had full on 8 yards of fabric in each of their dresses, and even the mother. So it was her family. They moved in there. Well, the chapel is set up to where there used to be like a little cry room up sort of next to the sanctuary, and it had windows so the women could look at still follow mass if they were in there with their children. Well, they decided, that's too close to the sanctuary. It's practically in the sanctuary, so that can't be. So we're going to move that. And they basically put us in the auditorium so we could see nothing. So we would go into a completely different room to nurse our babies, although I never obeyed that rule. I would just nurse the baby in church because I'm just like, this is ridiculous. But anyway, so pretty soon, that wasn't good enough either. Like the women couldn't just go in the auditorium. So they either had to go out to their car, or this Laura Ingalls lady came up with the solution of like this old hospital, like an antique. It was like a hospital, like divider or whatever. Oh. And it had the cloth. And so they put this cloth divider out in this room and made like this little nook that you would have to like shamefully go behind in order to feed your child. Oh, and then behind that, women were still like putting the blanket over themselves. It just blows your mind. So I never did that either because I'm a rebel. But like so many women, they just fell into line and they would just go do it. And the reason that happened was because one day when women were in there nursing their babies, because they couldn't be in church, this woman's son, who was maybe 13, 14, walked past, and he must have gone and told, Ma, that, I don't know. I saw women, and maybe who knows what he said. And then that's when that hospital thing came about. And it's like, you know what? Obviously it's just insane that women were told to go out in their cars, and we get really cold weather in the winter. Go out in your car and nurse your baby, or go to this other room. But that wasn't good enough either, So that's one insane story. And then the other one was when I had already basically left the trad sphere, but I would still go to like the fraternity sometimes. And so I ended up going to the fraternity parish. And that Sunday, the priest just happened to be talking about nursing mothers, and the first thing that he said was, we're having no more of this. Like, you're not allowed to nurse in the church, even if you're covered with a blanket. It's an offense to Christ. It's an offense.
What?
That is what he said. Those were his exact words. And so I immediately started nursing my baby in church. I was like, you're going to eat, child. Yeah, I'm just like, what is wrong? It's an offense to Christ that we as mothers, who like God gave us the capability of feeding our children, it's an offense to him for us to do that. It just makes no sense. But then they said, we have a room for you in the back. And again, like leaving church, walking down some long hallway and go sit in a broom closet because we don't want to see you nurse your baby.
Yeah, remember when it like made world news that Pope Francis had told this woman who was nursing her baby in church that it was fine that she was nursing at mass, and people were like, "Ooh!" and it like,
oh yes,
ruffling feathers. Yeah, that's awesome. Are you nursing, Cece? That's great. Laura, where's your baby?
Get him out.
Dang, I feel left out. Oh my god. Well, okay, so somebody was like, "Hey, what about all those like nursing Madonna pictures in old European churches and stuff? Like, they're still hanging there to this day, and you can find the pictures online." So I just typed in nursing Madonna, and I found all these pictures, beautiful sacred art, and Our Lady's just whipping one out there, which I don't even do when I nurse my baby. I try to like keep fabric. So I'm like, I'm gonna look some of these up, and I'm gonna put them up here. Here.
Good.
Okay, so this is from this alleged private revelation of Our Lady Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, where she actually shot milk into his mouth from a considerable distance. Wow. And there's pictures of this. Nobody's ashamed of this, all right? And he, to my knowledge, did not deny that this ever happened. Okay, so this is, one picture.
Okay, that would not be allowed in an SSPX chapel.
No way.
Not this one either. I mean, she's got a little fabric over, but it's like, man, Jesus needs to eat. She's not going to wait until a convenient moment or bush wanders by, She's taking care of her child. Like,
yeah. And notice how he doesn't have a blanket over his head either,
No, right. I mean, here she's nursing on the back of a donkey. I mean, you really can do it anywhere you need to. Look at her.
I just read about a woman who did it while she was mowing the lawn. So yeah, you literally can do it anywhere.
Yeah, my mother-in-law, she would like take these long road trips. The whole family would pack in the van and go, and she would just drive the whole time. And she's like, and I had a baby usually. And so they just passed the baby to me and I just nursed him while I was driving. So we didn't have to stop. She's like, I wasn't going to stop every time the baby would eat. That was a 16-hour drive. So even iconography. And sometimes in depictions of like the Last Judgment, there will be like a nursing Madonna and saints and angels all around. And she's just feeding. And yeah, it's like, awesome. Yeah. Another one, I mean, honestly, there's so many, but there is a church, Santa Maria Trastevere in Rome, and it's like, I think the oldest continuously operating church in Rome, and it's beautiful. My husband and I visited it. At the time, I didn't realize that there's this big mosaic facade on the outside of the building that has Our Lady nursing Jesus, very similar to this picture, and saints, on either side of them. And I'm just like, wow, that's like on the front of church, like, okay, yeah. I know that they didn't just, do that forever, it was for a time. And then I think around the 1200s, they kind of dialed down on those kind of representations, but they didn't remove them from all the churches. I mean, they're still out there, and there's still even monasteries that have these pictures and things. It's like, there's nothing shameful about it. Those pictures
Our Lady of La Leche.
Oh,
right?
Yeah, right.
Like, isn't that this image of Our Lady nursing? And that's the group was named, they're the ones that help mothers teach them how to breastfeed, whether it's a first-time mama or just a baby who's harder to breastfeed. So they're an amazing group. I know they helped me quite a lot with several of my babies. It's just interesting because all of those images, are European, it looks like. And it kind of comes back to sort of like the American puritanical culture again. I remember my grandma being horrified because she went to Rome and for the first time in her life when she was probably in her 60s or maybe early 70s. And she came back horrified because there were so many naked statues and pictures of people. She just could not believe that was Catholic, that was allowed.
I think we just don't realize how insulated we are in America and how pervasive our Puritan culture has been into all corners and all denominations. It's like the rest of the world, for the most part, is not having a problem with this that I'm hearing. And I mean, third world countries all over, they're not ashamed of their upper half. and they,
Exactly.
use it to feed their babies, and it's nobody bats an eye. I mean, my husband worked in the Guatemala mission for our diocese, and he's like, yeah, I mean, we'd have, when the priest would go to the mountain villages, I'd go with him, and we'd, he'd have to do all these baptisms, and the women would be walking up to the font and sometimes just nursing the baby, like very obviously right there, and just kind of hold it over the font so he could baptize it. They're like, I'm not going to pull the baby off and make him cry. Like, he's hungry, he's sleeping, whatever. Like, just do it.
Yeah.
And the priest just baptized him, and they keep going. And it's like,
Right.
it's all in a day's work.
It's
There's
okay.
nothing.
Yeah.
There shouldn't.
Right.
I mean, I guess maybe if it's your own husband, like, seeing that, whatever. But it's like, it shouldn't be sexualized. That, okay, if a woman's just exposing herself not for that reason, then yeah, there's probably an issue there, especially in our culture where that is provocative. But when you're nursing,
well, I mean, I'm married to a man, obviously. And he's told me several times, he's like, anybody that thinks that a nursing mother looks sexual or seems sexual or is a turn on, he's like, then they're a pervert. There's something wrong with them, not the mother nursing her baby.
Right.
So,
well, it shows what should be the fruit of sexual union, which is, that's why there are no pregnant women in pornography. There's probably no breastfeeding women in pornography, because it's sterilized. It's not fruitful. So as soon as you have the fruit, it's kind of like, oh yeah, that's what this is about, isn't it? Generating and producing and sustaining life. And yeah, that's kind of like a conscience smiter if you are already, struggling with something. So yeah, maybe you wouldn't want to be confronted with that, because it shows you that your own disorder is at work, and you can't see God's creation in a pure way. But that's not something then you turn on the woman.
No.
That's
no.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think there needs to be a lot more of these conversations. And I think it needs to be amongst Catholics. I've heard people talking about it, but it's not generally in the Catholic sense,
No.
It's women who are sick of the culture, or as a society, people looking down on nursing mothers, or telling them they have to go into the bathroom to feed their baby, or, put a blanket over their head. Like, mothers are tired of that. And they're like, why don't you eat with a blanket over your head?
Yeah, nursing is challenging for anyone who hasn't done it. And so especially for a first-time mom, being expected to do it under the cover of this dark blanket, you're trying to like see.
Yes.
And also, it's such an opportunity to bond with the baby, because their eye contact with you and that perfect distance where the baby can focus on your face any farther, and then they have trouble seeing you for a long time. So it's like, it's all built in, and it's like, you're supposed to look at them, not be like, oh, are you under there sweating away and sticking to my arm? I mean, it's like, okay. I mean, yeah, especially in hot weather, it's like, that's not even kind to the poor baby.
No, they're miserable.
Yeah.
No, I remember when we first moved here, like they had the local SSPX church that we were going to. There's like always a ton of nursing moms in there. They were always all covered up. And with my first baby, I had really struggled with breastfeeding. It was not a pleasant experience. And so like my second time around, I had to basically relearn how to do it. And so I went into the cry room. It's all packed with, all nursing mothers. They all have babies. They've all gone through this before. And I've got this screaming newborn who just wants to eat, but I've got to stay covered up. And this kid's flailing all over the place. But again, I have to stay covered up, and I can't see what I'm doing. And it was horrible.
You felt the pressure, like you had.
Yes.
So this was in the cry room amongst all the women.
Yes.
But you still felt pressure to be covered.
Yeah, you have to stay covered up at all times. Even like when I was growing up, you had to stay covered up like amongst your own family.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking like little toddlers running around. You have to stay covered up. You can't show anything. And so I remember.
Yeah, I never followed that rule. Never.
Well, I don't now.
Even in the SSPX.
I kind of quit. I actually ended up, so I would always look for a corner pew and like sit in the corner to where I could kind of like angle away. So I would always get like this 40-something-year-old mom who, she was like a veteran basically. And I would always get one of those. I actually got one of those where she like peeked over, like tapped on my shoulder and said, please cover up. A man might pass by.
Oh gosh.
Oh, and he can't turn away.
I'm like, what is a man doing by going by the window and like looking into a room that he knows is full of nursing mothers? Like, seriously, how is that my problem?
Right.
I know, and isn't that interesting? It's always those like those older women too that
Yeah.
just continue this instead of like helping everybody overcome this hypersexualized puritanical culture, they just encourage it.
I've actually only had one woman from that age group who has ever said anything about like breastfeeding and, breasts being for the purpose of feeding children and not like their secondary nature is sexual. Their primary nature is not sexual at all. And that, society need to move away from that. But I've only had one woman from that age group ever say anything like that. So yeah, like Stasia's right. Like it's always it's that age group in particular that
Women
really
shaming women.
Yeah.
Right. Well, moving on to another thing about men and women, but even in their youth, I mean, I've been told many times that boys and girls are forbidden from associating with each other at SSPX schools. Does that hold true for parish interaction, or outside of that? Like, is that generally kind of frowned upon, at least till like 18 or something? I mean, can you comment on that?
Well, it certainly is in the bigger parishes.
Yeah.
I really think, again, like it's just interesting how the different size parishes, I call them the mega hubs of the SSPX, which is like Post Falls, St. Mary's, Kansas. Like the new one is Walton, Kentucky. I think there's some bigger ones like back east, but I think the bigger they are, certainly the more extreme they are with that. I know that I've had friends from St. Mary's, Kansas tell me that if a girl or boy were caught talking to each other, even if it was on the weekend, they were suspended or sometimes even expelled from the school. And I do remember in Post Falls there was so the girls went to the Dominicans and then the boys went to the SSPX boys school. And there was my sister-in-law actually is the one that told me the story. She had, a ton. She's from a huge family and tons of boy cousins, and they went up skiing. And she was probably, 13, 14 at the time. And she got back to school on Monday, and somebody had told on her that she was up on the ski mountain with boys, fraternizing or whatever. And she explained to them that they were her cousins, but that didn't even really matter. Like you weren't even really allowed to hang with your cousins. And I remember in some extreme families, like they didn't even really want the brothers and the sisters like hanging out together. So there was different, variations of extreme. Like in our family, it was totally fine. And we just, I don't know. I mean, our parents allowed us to talk to boys, but see, we were also homeschooled. So there were really no repercussions for us if we were caught talking to boys. So what was your experience?
It was definitely frowned upon. Like I remember a couple like barbecues, like and get-togethers we'd have like a dozen families and all their kids that would get together, and I was actually like I'd actually been pulled aside by some people and told, oh, you shouldn't talk to them because you're not old enough to get married yet. I was 13, like 14 at the time. I remember the first time this happened, and I was just so confused because we had been playing volleyball, and I was just like, what? What?
Right.
What is
so
happening?
they make a totally normal thing once again, like abnormal and sinful.
Yeah.
It's completely normal for young boys and girls to like be friends, to be able to converse with each other, have conversations, and they make that weird and bad. And my friend St. Mary's also told me that it was so weird because it was so strict in St. Mary's. You could not, like, yeah, you were going to be expelled, suspended or expelled. I don't remember which one she said. If you were caught, I think it was expelled actually, caught talking to boys or girls. But then the minute you graduated, you were expected to get married ASAP and start a family. So how's that supposed to happen? And again, that leads to problems because there's this buildup in like probably both the girl and the boy's mind of like how great it's going to be, when they can finally get together, that their expectations are so high. And then it's like they're disappointed because the divorce rate amongst younger couples in these bigger hubs is through the roof. Within a year or two, they're either separating, divorcing. Nobody talks about that.
Yeah.
Well, we've never had a chance to just, interact as human beings. There's always this underlying expectation that you're only allowed to do it if you're going to get married. You're only allowed to have a relationship of any kind with the opposite sex, even if it's just friendship, if you're going to get married. And there's also the message being pushed that, boys and girls can't be friends. It's actually literally impossible for us to be friends because I was actually told we're going to develop romantic feelings. And so, like, even if you, like, and I experienced this myself, even if I did become friends with someone, like, I went into the whole relationship expecting to develop romantic feelings for this person. And so I kind of just, like, hyped myself up to do it before I even really knew them.
So you have this, no talking when you're young teens and really being around the other person. And then you have that in a combination with the parents not talking to their kids about the birds and the bees, not talking about Catholic teaching, all this Catholic teaching that we've missed for the last 50 years. And then you throw in pornography on top of that, because that is a huge problem in trad stuff. My husband has told me that, he knew tons of boys, tons. So you don't talk to each other. You have boys watching pornography, and then you get married young and you go into a marriage with that. Can you imagine the guy's expectations of what marriage and intimacy looks like after that?
It's so warped.
So warped.
Well, and it's also impossible for the woman to live up to that expectation too. So it's very, very damaging for her. She feels used.
Well, and what does she know going into it? Again, if she's one of those women that doesn't even know how it happens, and like going back to what a disservice to your children. But I mean, I know a ton of people. I heard this story from a priest, an SSPX priest. He was kind of laughing about it, like it was kind of funny. And my husband and I both were like, that's totally tragic. But what this man had been talking to the priest, and apparently his wife had been in a convent for 2 or 3 years, and then she came out because she didn't have a vocation. And so, they fell in love and got married. He said he waited 2 years because she thought it was a sin. She couldn't believe that was okay.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm like, okay, where were the priests in their life? Like, first of all, but like, what was she taught? And like, what in the world?
What kind of marriage classes were they given before they got married? I mean,
probably not.
I had a fraternity priest tell me that it was inappropriate that most diocesan marriage prep classes included some course in theology of the body. He's like, you have this young unmarried couple sitting in a room together watching these immodest videos talking about these subjects that are just so inappropriate for them at their stage. They're not ready for that. And he's like, it's an occasion of sin.
What kind of videos are we talking about here?
Christopher West standing in front of a room of engaged couples and talking about John Paul II's teaching.
Like lectures. We're talking about lectures.
Yeah.
Oh my word.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, not surprising. I mean, a lot of these, unfortunately now, a lot of these priests specific to the fraternity and society have been raised by uber Puritans. Because, again, like I look back at how my parents were raised, they were raised pretty normal. Like my mom, she wore, the jeans in fashion, ooh, bell bottoms, in the 70s. Like she looked hip and cute and had her hair cute. And then we had to dress in these dowdy, ugly Laura Ingalls prairie things down to our ankles. Like we went swimming in jean skirts. Like talk about dangerous, And it's like, so they were raised kind of normal. And then they come into this extremist group, who are just all about their preferences, and then raise us like so extreme because I guess the way that they were raised wasn't okay. I don't know if that's what they thought. And then somehow that was supposed to help us.
Right. Yeah.
Like you said the
So
other day,
strange.
Stasia, when we were talking, you said our parents, so many of us, unless they were just in it for generations, but a lot of people, they choose as adults to bring their families into traditionalism, but they've had this whole like normal growing up. Their brains are formed, hopefully, usually, and then they're like, they're already formed. And so they're choosing this, and then they're bringing their kids in, and it stands to reason their kids have a very different experience, and they've never gotten to live any other way. So it's very tempting for them to want to break out or just be like, what the heck? Like, I don't need this, when they get old enough and just run for the hills. It's like, well, what do you expect? It's too repressive. And then you're denying them the antidote to these urges that they have, and these things. You're not teaching them why God made us this way and what they're for and why it's a good thing, but only it needs to be in the right context. It's like, what kind of preparation are you giving them? Nothing. And like, so you have you're discouraged from associating with the opposite sex, you're shamed for being a woman with a tempting body, you're drilled that sex is bad, put in fear that everything is a mortal sin and hell is around every corner. So your entire growing up, then you somehow manage to meet and marry somebody, and how does that happen? And then you're expected to just flip a switch and be like sexually alluring to your husband and willing to engage with him every single time he asks you. And does that work?
No, it doesn't work.
No, because there's this underlying, my husband and I I think we tried to have some conversations about it a couple years ago, but we've finally been able, after 18 years of marriage, 16 years invalidly married, thanks to the SSPX, but 18 years. And we've finally been able to talk about how all of those things, head trash, I guess I'm going to call it, played a role in our relationship, in our intimate relationship with each other, because it was really hard to get past things. And I had a lot of almost health issues. I think because of it, because believe it or not, all of the pain and the issues that I had for years and years are gone. And they've been gone since I left the SSPX and read Theology of the Body and just learned what the church actually teaches.
There's actually a lot of evidence out there that points to that, in not only Catholic circles, but anywhere where there's that message being pushed onto women, where it's actually, there's a lot of health issues that women start to develop because of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's really,
their bodies probably trying to protect themselves.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. And thank God that I married a good, virtuous man who didn't think that I owed it to him. Because I've seen lots of broken down women who are told by their husbands that if they don't do it whenever the husband wants, even several times a day sometimes. I met a girl who had talked to a woman who finally kind of escaped her marriage, silently left after 16 years, because she was made to believe that she was committing a mortal sin if she did not obey and submit to his every whim. And so I married an awesome, lovely man who who respected me. But I feel like I was one of the lucky ones because I hear horror stories.
Like, how many happy marriages did
It's
you witness while you were in traditionalism?
oh, not many, not many truly happy marriages.
Yeah.
But I also want to go back. I went on a tangent there when I was talking about the priests because what I want to say is like I think in the trad sphere it keeps getting worse because now these kids that were raised the way that we were without church teaching and with their preferred teaching whatever they're teaching them in the seminaries um definitely teaching about this marriage debt which to them just basically means hey if you don't if your husband wants to get it on and you don't that's a sin and so you need to in other words and so these guys don't have any training in this and then they have like head trash from the way that they were raised as well which is this warped sense again of marriage because they probably their parents weren't happily married they've never even seen a happy marriage themselves
Well,
um
and it's more than that too, because even if the parents think they are happily married, a lot of times it's just not a healthy power dynamic either. And so, like, the woman is unwittingly attributing to that by thinking that she has no choice and being happy with it.
right or kind of like at least showing on the exterior that
Yeah.
she's happy even though she's completely miserable but
Yeah.
like see that's part of it too though like
Mhm.
it's good to be completely miserable because then you that's a sacrifice and you can offer that up
Suffering is good.
yeah
Happiness and suffering. Yeah.
and suffering is good
Oh,
Yeah, it
but
is.
again, it's like this warped sense of
Yeah.
suffering
yeah.
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
everything they warp everything
For the first 2 years of my marriage, I definitely experienced that where I would feel like extreme guilt and like this knowledge that I was committing a sin every time. It wasn't even saying no, it was every time I wanted to say no.
hmm
And a lot of times there are legitimate reasons for saying no. A lot of times there are. But I just felt like this extreme guilt because I that message had been pushed that I owed it. The marital debt, like I owed it. It was in the Bible. Yeah, I can't deprive him.
that's a whole conversation in and of itself
Yeah, it
Yeah.
definitely is.
but
Yeah, we should
like
definitely do
the
something on that just by itself and just really prepare with some digging into magisterial documents because I know this has been treated in church documents, but I think what's being done is that it's being taken a certain interpretation and sort of casting it onto people like here. And I think over time it's sort of lost its original context, that there's a fuller message to this that we're not really
Well,
getting.
and there's also like within the SSPX, there's also that culture of, John Paul II. He wrote, Theology of the Body and everything, and he was a Vatican II Pope. We reject everything Vatican II. So, anything written by, Paul VI, John Paul II, Vatican II is automatically bad, even if there's been tons of popes before them that talked about this, and there's been magisterial teaching before that talked about it.
Mhm.
even though the trads have never read any of that
None of it. They've never read any of it, but it's bad because it's Vatican II. Vatican II is
yeah
evil and
because modernist
compromised.
modernist interpretation
Yeah,
right
yeah. So
What thoughts would you have to share on that, Cece? Just what we've been talking about.
I think you guys have it covered. I'm just along for the ride. I'm just over here like, I agree.
Okay. Oh my gosh.
Veronica said that even when she felt like saying no. So what's interesting is like it's just black and white. When the priests of the society talk to couples about it, everything is black and white, and it's like they never even take into consideration the actual relationship between the wife and husband because you know again we all any of us who are married we understand that if the wife is having a bad day, if she has a reasonable husband, you just have a conversation and you just say, I've had a rough day. I am tired. Like the kids have, touched me way too much today, and I don't want to be touched anymore. I can't have anybody else touch me. And like my husband just goes, okay, good night. You know,
Yeah,
like
just rolls over.
It's not like, you know what? Like this is the debt you owe me. You know, like who does that? Like I do know that some of these men who are warped think that way, but again, I think it goes back to like they don't even have a normal relationship. Then do they even talk to each other? Because I just find that, like, again, if you kind of have some knowledge and understanding and compassion and sacrifice coming from both sides, it's not that hard to figure out, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's absolutely
But that's the other thing. Okay, NFP, sorry, that's another subject we could just talk about forever.
Yeah.
But
NFP.
what I wanted to put this in there. That is such a power trip for these SSPX priests, because you know, nursing actually always just helped me space my children, so I wasn't having babies every year. And but so many people that I know, family members and friends, nursing didn't work for them. They would be nursing, and when their baby was 2 months old, they would get pregnant again every single time.
Mm-hmm.
And so then they would eventually go talk to a priest, maybe after 3 or 4 kids, because the wife is just going crazy. And it would be this discussion where they would be asking permission, because NFP was looked down upon. I mean, I've talked to so many people who basically call it Catholic birth control.
100%. That was what they called it. That was my experience as well.
And so they would go to this priest, and the priest would be like, well, you know, would make this determination, like, you can only be on it 9 months, or you can. And I'm just now I'm thinking about that, like, and the people would be like, oh, thank you, okay, 9 months, you know, and they would just be so grateful that they got his permission. And it's like, again, so warped. That is not what the Catholic Church teaches about NFP. But they took it, and first of all, it was looked down upon. It was bad. It was like Catholic birth control. You only use it in extreme situations. And then, you know, they would make the determination for you.
Where does it
nothing
say
about
that? I mean, yeah, seek
Like-
counsel from your confessor, but I don't think any church document ever said that it's up to a priest to dispense you or to give you permission for this or that marital activity. It's like, no, it's always, in the language that I have read, it's always left up to the discernment of the couple, because only they really know what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Precisely. And that's what I'm saying. Like, these priests wouldn't really know these couples. You know, they don't. There's so many people, and there's, you know, so few priests. They just don't really know them. And it's like, for them to like take that authority upon themselves, that determination about what this couple needed, not even knowing anything about their life, you know, other than, yes, they had a baby every year for 5 years. So, oh, okay, you can have a 9-month break, you know. Who are you to determine that?
Right.
Well, and it went beyond that as well, because like the understanding of what NFP was inside of the society was extremely warped as well, because, you know, they saw it as Catholic birth control, when, you know, the actual teaching of the church is so much more than that. I mean, I've had conversations with people where they were going to use NFP to space out their kids, and I made a comment about how hard it was for my husband and I to, you know, learn the rules and put them into practice and things. And I mentioned chastity in marriage, and he laughed. This person laughed at me and was like, chastity in marriage, that doesn't even exist. What are you talking about? You don't need to have that. You're married. Wow. And I was just like, no, they use NFP primarily as a birth control method, and that's all it is to them.
Wow.
So it's very twisted.
Well, and like you said, sometimes it takes 3 children to even figure NFP out. And so I knew people who started at child number 3 doing it for 9 months, and then it wouldn't work, you know. And then the next time they'd start trying it again, and again, it wouldn't work. I mean, it wouldn't work because it's such an intricate, like, deep understanding of of the woman's body. And like, we're not even taught, like we don't really know what's going on in our body. Like, you have your cycle every month, but past that, you don't really understand. And again, you don't take these classes that are available in the church for women to take. And so you're just kind of lost and looking up information on your own, left looking for that information with no help. And it can be really difficult to get it figured out. But basically what happens, I think I was listening to somebody on YouTube, maybe it was a couple on YouTube, and they were talking about how when they did NFP, it brought them closer together spiritually, because
Yes.
it's such a sacrifice on both parts, like on the man's part and the woman's part, and this understanding, and you have to be able to show love and affection in different ways. And so it actually brought them closer together. And I thought that was beautiful.
Yeah, the divorce rate for couples that practice NFP is like 2%. And I think a lot of that is because, again, they learn, they have to invest in their relationship. They have to learn other ways of loving to keep their love alive. And it's this very considerate thing. They're also with always the openness to life. That's why they're not using anything actually in the way, because it's like, well, we are discerning that this is prudent for us at this time. But if God decides otherwise, we'll take the baby. Like, that's the point of it. You're not shutting God out. You're not shutting life out. You're just like, we're trying to make a good decision here based on our circumstances. And if we're wrong, we'll take it. Like, God, you can send us a baby. But again, it's
how many times
what about the poor man, the poor man being deprived during those 8 days or whatever, that they can't do anything. And I'm like, and those 8 days are like the only days that the woman really wants to do it.
Exactly. What about my sacrifice?
That's great. Yeah.
It was actually, you're talking about how we have to, if God decides that he's going to send a child, we accept that. And that's what happened to me. I mean, I'm pregnant right now, and that's what happened. And we actually, I ended up sending my chart to an NFP instructor. She couldn't figure it out either. We have no idea how I got pregnant. And just like something happened. I was like, I looked at Seth and I'm like, obviously God really, really, really wanted this to happen. So
that's right.
Here we are. We're part of like what's the 2% failure rate or something, I think.
Yeah, right.
Wow.
That's beautiful.
That's great.
A special baby.
Very.
So mothers are expected to have this, like, every baby they can physically produce until their body just quits and can't do it anymore. But like, what's in place to help support women in doing that?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Zero.
Yeah. Zero.
Zero. No. And that's the other thing, right, is that the woman, I mean, I was just going to ask you girls, like, how many women did you run across and know who are just a complete wreck? Because it's hard to get a handle on anything when you're having babies. I mean, your hormone, for one thing, it's hard on your health. Yeah. Your hormones are all over the place because you're pregnant, then you have the baby, then you're nursing, and then you have all of the hormonal effects after having a baby. And, I mean, they say that it takes 2 years to basically, for your uterus and everything to kind of get back to normal, for your body to regulate. And then if you're having a baby every year, so you're kind of a wreck. And then you're trying to raise all these little beings that need you so much because they're all babies. When you have 5 under 5, they're all babies. And it's hard to give them all the attention that they need. And they kind of get lost in the shuffle. And it's not fair to them either.
There's definitely a very heavy focus on, the responsibility towards your future children instead of the children you actually have. Like, you have to have as many as possible. I mean, it was a running joke in, the circles that my family ran in, that if a person, they had 8 kids, that's a good start.
Mm-hmm.
I was just going to say, while you're having all those kids and trying to raise kids, you're also supposed to be fit and good looking and not overweight and I'll check all these boxes.
And being
eat
there for your husband
healthy,
with all of his needs.
do your hair, like look good, but not good so other people look at you.
Yeah, gotta maintain that.
Put your hijab on
women's
when you're
health
outdoors.
is it is not talked about. Anastasia,
Actually, mental health isn't even believed in.
Yeah, mental health or even physical health. Like Stacia was talking about, like not knowing our bodies, and we knew about our periods, but not even my mom talked to me about my period. Like she didn't talk to me about my period, not the birds and the bees. Like you figure it out on your own, and I knew about NFP, but and even though it was never directly told to me, I still was like, well, if we ever need to do NFP, God forbid, we would have to go to a priest. Oh, geez, So even though it was never directly told to me, so that's a very interesting thing when you're in these trad groups. It doesn't need to be directly told to you. It's in you.
It's all the older like women, like I'm saying, Cease, that like they talk about this stuff in front of you, and it's just from a young age, it's just kind of fed to you from these women who enable all of this. It's also interesting because it's like having a ton of babies is a competition among some women. I mean, some of these women definitely, they love being pregnant. They love having tons of babies. And it's like they're kind of good with the baby stage. And then as their kids get older, again, they don't really have a lot of tools, and they don't know how to deal with them. And so by the time their kid is ready to leave the house, a lot of them bolt, and they wonder why they left the faith entirely. Right. So there's no happy medium. There's a lot of imbalance. Again, I think it just goes back to like the imbalance of this extreme culture.
Right. Well, and I also feel like if women do feel trapped in that lifestyle of, always being pregnant, always being nursing, always having a child, they feel guilty. And so they double down, because you're not allowed to feel guilty over having, the gifts that God has given you, the child that we've prayed for.
Yeah. And so what you're saying is like when she gets pregnant again and she finds herself kind of being upset about it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that is very common.
Yes.
Very common. Yes. And then, yes, I've had people in my life who, who have gotten pregnant and they're feeling overwhelmed. And so they're not as happy about it as they think they ought to be. And then if they happen to have a miscarriage, there's guilt on top of guilt because, they think that, again, they should have been happier to begin with. And because they weren't happy, now they feel guilty because they lost the baby.
Like I lost it because I didn't want it. Like
exactly.
I don't know if they think that necessarily, but it's like because they weren't grateful for it, like so grateful, honestly grateful, then maybe it was taken away. I don't know.
Took the baby. I have actually experienced that myself. Like my first miscarriage, I actually did experience those feelings where I was terrified to be pregnant. I was absolutely petrified because I was terrified of childbirth. And I didn't want to be pregnant, and then I felt guilty over not wanting to be pregnant. And then when I miscarried, I, felt guilt on top of that. And like, it was that exact thing where I was like, well, maybe God was taking the baby away from me because I just didn't want it enough. So it was just like this trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma. And it was horrible.
And then another layer on that, which this is another video, which we should really do, is the whole, the trad drilling about limbo of the innocents. So your baby that died in your tummy that didn't get baptized, you're never going to see that baby because they're not enjoying the vision of God. They're in a place of perfect natural happiness, but they'll never get to be with God and they'll never get to be with you. And so, sorry, mom, like that's just fallen nature, and then they can't do anything about it. And which the church has never officially taught. It's only been speculation Yes, the fathers of the church debated about it. They didn't all agree, and it was never like codified in church law like some people like to put out there. So we really need to do some work clearing that up. But again, the terrible grief that, strikes a woman because she's like, this child, I will never know. It will never know me. It will never know God, which is like, as Catholic women, that's our job, is to get our kids to heaven.
Yeah.
And you failed. You didn't even have a chance,
Yeah.
even though
Yeah.
you were going to do everything right, Yeah, you can try to baptize that miscarried baby, but there's no guarantees. Sorry, honey. No consolation for you.
No.
Yeah. Well, and then there's the, there's the aspect of that baby, if they were big enough, not being allowed to be buried in a Catholic cemetery too. That's another huge thing. I knew a couple who lost their baby, well, literally close to the due date, just probably a few days away from the due date. She stopped feeling the baby move.
Oh,
And they went in and the baby had passed away. And so she went through labor, all of it, just like she was having a live baby. But when it came time to burying this child, the priest was like, sorry, can't be buried in our Catholic cemetery. So they were going to clear a place in the woods next to the cemetery that was not in the fenced part, that they could put their baby there.
What?
And instead, the parents were very upset about it, of course. And so they just buried their baby on their own property. But yeah, it's so cold. Like, yep, your baby's not included because, didn't get baptized. So as if that was somehow their fault, that their child wasn't baptized.
Right. Right. And the church,
By
I mean,
water.
I just made some research on that too. And it's, that was, customary for a long time that, unbaptized children were not buried in consecrated ground. So there was a book about, someone was doing research about Ireland in like the early 20th century and about like maternal death rates and infant mortality and like, how that played into religion and culture and stuff. And they were talking about all these graves, all over Ireland. Like this one area, there was 50,000 unmarked infant graves because they weren't allowed to be put in the church cemeteries. So they had to go somewhere. And, even if a pregnant woman died, that baby, because it wasn't baptized, sometimes the pregnant woman would be refused burial in a Catholic cemetery because she was containing remains of an unbaptized person.
Oh my goodness.
Whoa.
Wow.
Yeah. Like it gets really, so I'm trying to find out when that officially would have been not like policy anymore, although it sounded like it was kind of up to the pastor to decide case by case, and some allowed them in the cemeteries and some didn't, and then eventually just kind of tapered off. And so now it's not a thing, and now they recommend that you have funerals for the children of parents who intended to baptize them Catholic, and there's rules about that, but there's special prayers for it. They're not guaranteeing where they go, but it's very hopeful and consoling, and like there's a blessing for parents after a miscarriage. I mean, there's all this beautiful outreach and consolation that it's like God is not bound by his sacraments. Even St. Thomas said that. It's like, no, God is bigger than just the little bit that we know about him.
Yeah.
And so to limit him like that, and then to just be like, oh, well, it's like, again, are we assuming burdens that God is really asking us to bear? This isn't even a definite church teaching, and gradually church teaching is moving more and more away from it. So,
and then once again, the only reason they don't follow church teaching is because they think they know better, right? It's like this now, like they're not following suit with what the church, the living, breathing church of God that, God instituted is saying about it or the practices. So they have to go back and be what they consider traditional. Although, again, when has it ever been traditional? I love when people say this. When has it ever been traditional to disobey the Pope for 60 years? Never.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, this kind of, this whole topic of, maternity and pregnancy, it kind of makes me think of just the different like social mores that are kind of put upon women in traditionalist circles. Not necessarily like taught from the pulpit, but like people know about them and it circulates in the community. And there's like this peer pressure that's like, well, you're holding people to this high standard. And especially because trads often get very conspiracy theorists. I mean, and like distrusting the establishment, and that can extend even to the medical establishment. And then there's like, I mean, we probably all know women who have had experiences, and some of you have, where people were pressuring you to do things that they, even against medical advice, maybe, where they were like, oh, you can't have a C-section, that's for wimps, you don't go to the hospital, you do it yourself. I mean, I think I have a friend from the southern part of the States. She had had a son by C-section. She was a high-risk pregnancy, and so they just did a C-section delivery. And then sometime after that, she entered the society, environment, SSPX, and she was pregnant again. And this was also a high-risk pregnancy. And all of her friends in the society were like, no, don't listen to them. You can do a VBAC, and you should just do it at home as a free birth with no attendant.
Oh, no.
And she was so swayed by them and wanted, she's so captivated by traditionalism, wanting to do everything hardcore. And she's like, well, I think these people have confidence that I can do it. And this is what everybody thinks I should do. And so it must be the right thing. So I'm going to do it. So she did. And she labored at home for 3 days until her placenta ruptured, and they barely got her to the hospital in time. And her baby was in the NICU for weeks. They both almost died. I mean, they were barely saved. And after that shocking, traumatic experience, she started to think like, wow, like I'm here because of the counsel of my friends who were telling me what was right, and it put my life in danger and my child's life in danger. She's like, what else might these people be telling me that maybe I should be questioning? And it started her on this whole thought process that ended up, leading her out of the society eventually. But I think, Anastasia, you had a similar experience yourself.
Yeah, that's a pretty familiar story. I was young and dumb, 20 when I got pregnant and with my first baby. And yeah, you just do what the people around you are suggesting, and the way that they have babies. And when you mentioned how like having a C-section is such a shameful thing, like it just like hit me in the heart again, because that's exactly what I thought. Like I was just like, no matter what, I can't have a C-section, like that's such a weakness.
You're less of a mother somehow because you've had
You
a
are.
C-section.
Yeah. And even though so I don't think I even really even gave that, and it wasn't even an option in my mind. And there was a lay midwife that a lot of the women, not everybody, but a lot of the women in the parish used. And I was kind of in the more conservative, or shall we call it just extreme rad trad variety of person. And so those were kind of the because there are different like flavors of or levels of extremism, right? And some of the women were more modern in the parish, and they had their babies in the hospital. And but anyway, so I read all the Ina May Gaskin books, like, women are made to do this, the C-section right in the hospitals are just exponential because the doctors want to go on vacations. Some of that might be true. I'm not saying that's not true. And certainly, there was an era in the history of America where, through the early 1900s through the, till 1960s, 70s, where women were treated like animals. They were put to sleep, given that twilight sleep, and who knows what happened to them while they were having a baby. Like, they don't remember. So, doctors definitely thought they knew better than a woman's body. But anyway, I bought into all of that. And then my experience was tragic. It was terrible. I went into labor, and the midwife showed up, and I just she was so crunchy that she didn't even she would just go sit on my bed or sit in a chair far away from me while I'm sitting here laboring, like scared, and like it hurts so bad, like labor hurts, and I just it was like I just kind of was despairing. But at some point, 4 hours after I go into labor, I start pushing, but I ended up pushing for 4 hours, which should have been a sign to this midwife something was wrong initially. And then when my baby was born, he went into cardiac arrest because I had gestational diabetes, and because the midwife didn't believe in that, I never was tested. And when their sugar drops, that's a pretty common thing. But they would have known what was going on in the hospital. They would have seen that he was in distress, and I think things probably would have happened a lot different. And he ended up dying at 8 months old due to complications from the birth. So yeah, that I learned the hard way, right? Like it was humbling, and it hurt, and and after that, I'm allergic to pregnancy. I mean, I'm high risk every time I do get pregnant, and so it is dangerous to have these women. It's like there's this pressure in this culture. Like again, yeah, if I did feel less because I had to have babies in the hospital, and I couldn't do it on my own, and I could, and I was sick every pregnancy with something new, with something different that was high risk. And I think I overcame it because I'm probably because of my personality, but I think I didn't care what people thought. It's like, I'm going to do whatever I have to do to have a safe pregnancy and birth. But I think for like more timid or shy women, like that pressure could really get to you.
Thank you for sharing that. That's just, again, we share these things not to vilify people, because again, some of these people have good intentions, or even those books you read, the Ina May Gaskin books I read and really benefited from. But again, it's not like a one size fits all.
Right.
A thing. And then you might be trying to build a woman up and be like, you can do this, you don't have to be worried, and you don't need all that stuff. Like, you might think you're doing good thing cheering her on, but again, it's like it puts this pressure on her to perform. Like, women have to do the ultimate and be the ultimate, even pain relievers during birth, whatever. Like, that's frowned upon, because it's like, if you're trying to sidestep all the suffering that comes with childbirth, you're denying your child some kind of grace that you would have merited for them during that thing. I mean, it's like major guilt trip. Like, every time you turn around,
Right.
it's a guilt trip. It's like, woman, you do it, and you do everything, and you do it right, and you do it as much as you possibly can, or you're not worth the dirt on my boots.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was a huge thing.
I remember being told about, like, when it came to like pain relief and stuff during labor, that pain during childbirth was our punishment for original sin, right? And so we were not allowed to deny God of that punishment. This was going to get us out of purgatory. And so like I felt guilty getting an epidural, because I got an epidural. Oh, I did. My first birth was just like so not. Actually, both of them were so not. I was induced. I got an epidural. They broke my water. Like, basically every
shame on you.
Every complication they said would land me inside of the operating room. Did not land me in the operating room, but I remember like my first birth, especially, like I hemorrhaged really bad, and I didn't actually know I was hemorrhaging until like hours and hours after, when my husband, and it was like, oh yeah, by the way, everybody was freaking out because of this, and I was just like totally out of it, of course. But like, if I had given birth at home and actually tried to attempt it, and at the time we were living in Alaska, so a hospital was a 45-minute medevac flight away. So the chances of me dying were just through the roof. I had people suggesting that Seth read books on midwifery so that we could do a free birth at home. And like, it was just like this absolute terror of hospitals. Like, if I set foot in one, something bad is going to happen.
Right.
And so I had family members that wanted to be there during the birth. And when it came down to it, we just didn't tell them that I was going into labor. And I was just like, I can't because I'm getting induced. And then I got another epidural.
Well, also, you probably would have felt pressure that you didn't need to feel.
Exactly.
Wow, it's shame about something. It's not even a moral issue. And it's just like, every opportunity, let's put shame on that person instead of supporting them, being like, you're an adult, you need to make your own decisions, and like, I still love you and accept you, and I don't need to have an opinion on all of your reproductive choices.
Well, and then they try to take a non-moral issue and turn it into a moral issue.
Yeah.
That was
that's why most ex-trads are like plagued with scruples, Laura. It's just a guilt-ridden culture.
Yeah.
You really do just take on a lot of guilt that really isn't yours.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I just want to put that out there because I'm just so appreciative of you ladies sharing your stories. I mean, Cece and I have had some very happy home births, so that happens too.
I love that women can have home births and they do them well. Also, your bodies just can do it. But again, I think that's just taking into consideration that every woman is different and we're not all the same. And you can't just put us all in the same boat that, if we can't do XYZ, then we're not woman enough, or we're not, we're not worthy of whatever. And so I love that women can have home births and have healthy home births. That's great.
Yeah.
I don't have anything against that, but I think that this idea that if you can't have a home birth and get through it and have a healthy baby, that there's something wrong with you is really rough on women.
Yeah, again, this idea of like competition where it's like I gotta be the best woman. I gotta have the most kids. I've got to do everything, most natural, or like we've talked to amongst ourselves about how like the number of children is a status symbol for men and women in traditionalism, or sometimes they even refer to them as with numbers or something like code. It's like, oh yeah, I have all these kids, and it's like, yeah, if your family is so huge, are they? Does it follow that they're the happiest family because you're the biggest one? I mean, like, are you the most functional? Like, tell us, like, do.
Yeah. Well, none of that matters because the kids' opinions don't matter.
If a kid does speak up, then they're rebellious and
need to have a smackdown.
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, these social mores that we just kind of touched on that, they're not necessarily taught, but it's like they're circulating around the communities. They're attitudes that are kind of encouraged. It's like the authority figures must know that they're going on. So if they're not like speaking out against them, like, hey guys, this is problematic, then they're kind of complicit in allowing these things to continue. I mean, that's not this whole pressuring of people to do certain things, even medically, that might not even be safe. I mean, that's just one example, but there's other ones too. Like we kind of had talked about, like no higher education of women, because like that's kind of discouraged because it's like, well, I mean, unless you go to St. Mary's College in Kansas, oh well, that's okay because that's SSPX. But it's like,
well, and going to St. Mary's College, there's like this running joke within the SSPX that women only go to St. Mary's College to get their MRS
degree.
Yeah, and that was the thing. That was the only reason women went. It wasn't for education or any purpose like that. It was solely for the purpose of getting married.
The thing is, they're not even they're not a certified college in St. Mary's either. So that's just another joke.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, the interesting thing is that the Dominicans are the opposite of that. Actually, they're very feminist minded. A lot of the girls that went to the Dominicans, they were encouraged to get an education. So again, it's just like these kind of extreme opposite ends of the spectrum. So the girls that went to the Dominicans, that was okay and highly encouraged. But then the men, or the young men, didn't look at them as marriage material, because they were kind of like considered feminists because they would go off and get a higher education. A lot of them, interestingly enough, didn't get married. A lot of the ones that were like my age in that class didn't get married.
Interesting. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can't have a balance. It's just got to be kind of like one or the other.
Right.
And the reason behind not wanting, to promote higher education for women, in my experience, was that then they're considered, it's like wasted on the woman because she's just gonna be a cook and clean mother of many babies anyway. So why does she need that? And if the SSPX is typically discouraging homeschooling, which they do in different areas, at least, if not everywhere, then the mother really doesn't need to be educated because she's not even supposed to be teaching her own kids. So we don't even need to have that base covered because you're supposed to send them to an SSPX school.
Yeah.
I know several people who were taking the marriage classes in St. Mary's, Kansas, particularly, um, where they were told that they were not allowed to homeschool their children. And if they did, it was a mortal sin.
Whoa.
And the reason that a big reason why mothers could not homeschool their children is just they're not smart enough. They're not educated enough.
Oh.
But
So,
meanwhile,
they need to go.
SSPX schools are filled with teachers who have no certification required.
Nope,
Just
no
anybody who's willing to
certification.
teach.
And also, I mean, some of them do. And I think they are trying to get away from that because they must realize that it's kind of hypocritical. But most of them, yeah, the younger, especially the ones that teach the younger children, are not certified teachers. Um, and then also, their schools are filled with predators.
Oh, we're so concerned about your child getting a good education. You have to send them to our schools. Even if you are qualified or, you have a great program to do it at home, it's not good enough. It's like, wait a second, that sounds like maybe you want to just have our kids under your control so that you can
Yeah.
determine what they learn and what they're exposed to and not, because you don't trust the parents to maybe do as good of a job as you would.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. And it's also just indicative of the cult that they are. Like the church doesn't demand that. The church doesn't demand that if there's a Catholic school within 15 miles of you that you're putting your children in there. They respect you as a parent, that you know what's best for your child.
Oh yeah, 100%. Like I was absolutely shocked when we started going to a diocesan parish and they had this huge homeschool co-op that was ran by the parish and, endorsed by the
Oh,
parish priest. And I was just absolutely shocked because I'd never experienced that. Like homeschooling was so looked down upon within the SSPX.
yeah.
Wow.
And then the diocese had like all of these resources for homeschoolers. It was just a complete and total opposite of what I've been raised with.
For sure.
Wow. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
and again, like, we're talking about women being just, not really invested in, because it's like, well, all you have to do is keep a house and keep kids alive, basically. And so you're like, okay, but then there's no support system for women, and often trad families are very isolated from one another. Like they see each other at church, but that's kind of it, and everybody's maxed, because if everybody has 10 kids plus or whatever, who has anything to go around? So,
well, and also, can I just interject here that a lot of these families too, they don't even have family around. Some of them have left their family wherever they came from because they felt that this community was what they needed in order to raise their children Catholic, right? So they left everything behind, maybe even a good job for the husband, to come to these communities, and they have their parents are not there, no siblings, no family really. And yeah, I mean, they do become really isolated too, because people don't look out for each other in the society. That's another, I mean, Veronica was talking about being surprised about the homeschool co-op. That's something that just still floors me, is in our parish, how people just look out for one another. Like they care about you. They truly do. They don't even have to know you. There's been certain tragedies that have happened in the parish, and everybody just comes together, and like the Knights of Columbus are there, handing out checks to help, like however they can, and monetarily is always a huge thing. And it's like, they're just really, people would set up like GoFundMe accounts or something like that for certain tragedies. But as a whole, like as a community, they didn't really pull together for certain people. And especially if you were like a family kind of looked down upon because of your poverty, or who knows, what's coming to my mind is a story of a family who actually converted to the society. They were Protestant, but then they were Wiccan, and then they came out of that and kind of educated themselves into Catholicism. But what they found was the SSPX. And I just remember, like, they were kind of looked down upon, and then they really, really started struggling because she was one of those that felt like she had to have babies. Like, this is now, like, they can converted to Catholicism. This is kind of expected. Everybody has huge families, and it was too much for her. And she literally did go mental, and she had to even be put in an institution for quite a few years, and their family fell apart, and nobody was really there for them. And so eventually the whole family just ended up kind of trickling out of the SSPX and leaving totally.
Yeah, I think they actually completely fell away from the faith.
That's right. Leaving
Yeah.
Catholicism. Yes.
Yeah.
But they never even knew what it was like to be in the church.
Yeah.
I mean, she had the reason that she had was originally drawn to Catholicism was because after their Wiccan days, they didn't go directly into Catholicism, but they became pro-life. And so they would stand in front of the, pro-life Planned Parenthood with signs. And who was there? The Catholics praying their rosary. And so she actually learned about the Catholic faith through Catholics in the church. But then they lived close to the SSPX chapel and found that. And it ended up just kind of destroyed their family, really.
You've got these people with this pressure on to produce these huge families and support them, but then you've got this idea that's foisted on you that there's these very strict divisions of labor and traditional gender roles that have to be upheld, like certain things that boys only do and girls only do, and it seems like the bulk of the work falls on the girls and the women in the family. And if there's not enough of them to go around, well, too bad. It's just like, well, I know I'm the dad. I'm not going to change a diaper. I'm not going to do this. I mean, how often did you guys see that kind of playing out and sabotaging even husbands being able to help their own wives when they needed it?
I can speak about my family and a couple other families that I saw. I do know, like Cecilia, she married into her husband's family. They basically had all boys at the end. And so the boys were made to do the dishes and the laundry. And I don't know if they changed diapers, but I do know that they had to do some of that work that they consider women's work. And so again, it just kind of varies, I think, from family to family. But most of the cases that I saw, it's true that the men did not, and men and boys didn't really help out with any of that. The housework was the women's, and especially changing diapers, were kind of on the women. There was, Veronica, you know the family I'm talking about, but such an extreme family. When I lived in Oregon, that they're okay. They didn't allow their kid, even their daughters, to change their boy babies,
Yes.
because it was, a temptation, or I mean, just freaky about it. And
Yeah.
it was kind of sick because one of my friends told me this story. She said, her family was allowing this family to live in an extra house that they had. And one day they all went up there for dinner. I think they invited them up for dinner, and she had just had a baby. The baby was maybe a month old, maybe a month and a half. And, this is her family's house that they're kindly allowing these people to live in. And she went over to the couch and started changing her baby boy. And the dad came over furious and just started like lambasting her and telling her, how dare you scandalize my children? And his daughters at the time, Veronica, they were probably, I don't know, like 17, 18.
This almost
some of the
exact
old-
thing happened to my family, but they didn't catch it until after the diaper was already changed. One of the older daughters had seen the diaper being changed. It was one of my younger brothers being changed.
Yeah.
And so like the diaper got finished being changed, and then it was actually the mother that approached the person who had changed the diaper and was just, yeah, exactly. How dare you scandalize my children like this? And we were all so confused. Like, what are you talking about? What do you mean scandalize?
You're putting these ideas into kids' heads. It's like, yeah, you're shaming your daughters about, if you don't dress modestly, you're tempting your father and your brothers to sin. If you change a diaper in front of somebody, you're tempting somebody. It's like, kids aren't going to just think of that. Kids are just kids, and they're just living life, and they're just like doing what they do, like the way God made them. And it's like, and that baby has a dirty diaper, needs to be taken care of. And if somebody's going to have a problem with that, again, what kind of perversion is making you think that that's an issue?
Well, I actually find that is such a great way to educate your children. When you have a baby, the opposite sex of the other child, I mean, I don't know, maybe some people in your comments will think I'm a pervert, but I honestly, like, when I'm changing, I just treat it like it's normal. And a lot of times the child will come up and be like, why do they look different? It's like, because God made them look different. This is a little girl or a little boy, and your little girl or little boy, it's just, and they're like, oh, okay. And they walk away.
That's
and
it.
It's so normal. That's it.
Yeah.
It's when you make it weird that it's weird.
And I've actually ran into this conversation with family members where because like we teach our kids, the proper anatomical terms for their body parts. Like we don't hide anything, nothing. And I was actually having a conversation with somebody about that, and they were like, well, if you teach them, because we were also talking about boundaries and like teaching kids, the names of your body parts. We teach proper physical boundaries with people. And one of their questions was, well, if you teach them physical boundaries, aren't they going to know why those boundaries exist? They can't know why those boundaries exist. And I was just like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, This is a joke. Like, you can't teach your kids physical boundaries because you're so terrified about them, actually learning about what those body parts are for and why we should guard them. It's like, what in the world?
It's just not. They make everything so complicated. Yeah. It's just not that hard.
Well, and they make it so overtly sexual before it's even necessary. I mean, like that story you were telling, Stasia, that was about a baby. Yeah. It was a baby, and they were making the conversation around the diaper changing of a baby so just unnecessarily sexual. And it's ridiculous, and it's a perversion, honestly, in my mind.
It leads to incest.
Yes,
it does.
Yes.
I was looking up a couple years ago. I was highly involved in when all of this abuse was being exposed. I had quite a few friends who were abused, and so it kind of made me start looking into things and just trying to understand the incest rate in the county where St. Mary's, Kansas is 40%. And mostly trads live in that county.
Oh my gosh.
Now, I mean, why? But I do know why. I know why. Because they're raised in a hypersexualized culture where everything, like, these children are curious and nobody's giving them any answers. Well, they're going to go find
It's like that movie. This isn't, I mean, it's not funny, but like that movie, The Village, where they have like the town and then the woods, and they're like, those we do not speak of. And somebody said, well, if we're not speaking of them, they sure talk about them a lot. It's like, we don't name it, but we speak about it. It's like,
all the time.
All the time. And everybody, it's that
serious. You mentioned that
all the time. And that's why they stay in the town. It's like,
that's right.
You're still training them in boundaries, but they're fear boundaries and of what you don't understand, and that everything is bad out there. But it's not.
Right. And like, what is the message of that? At the end of the movie, all of these tragic things happen because of the lies of the elders, right? Yeah. And it's like this, it's so funny because it's not funny. Like you said, it's not funny. But my husband brought up that movie like a year ago. He's like, let's watch that again. He's like, do you remember watching that when we were in the SSPX? He's like, everything that we're dealing with and seeing, it reminds me of that movie, but I kind of forget how it goes. So we watched the movie and we're just like looking at each other like, holy cow. Like, it's exactly like that. Everything is off limits and out of boundaries because the elders had some bad experiences in the world. You can't shield your children from that, but you can prepare them and you can give them tools to deal with it. And that's the only way to do it. You
Well-
can't hide them from it, because eventually they're going to go into that world and they're not going to have any tools.
I think a lot of these parents, though, really do think that they can shield their children from it forever because, and this kind of ties back into the whole attitude around women within like certain cultures in the SSPX is that, we go from, the leadership of our dads, our fathers to, the leadership of our husbands. So we, oftentimes, these women never have any kind of exposure to the world. So in the parents' minds, there's no need to prepare them for it because they're not going to be exposed to it because they're going to be under the protection of a man at all times.
There's a weird dynamic that enters in there that I've heard you ladies talk about, where it's like the husband will even tell the wife, well, maybe this, so what if this isn't right, or this is a sin, but if I'm leading the family, that's my decision, and then you're not culpable for it, even if
that's my sin. That's my sin.
It's like, wait a second, where is that in church teaching? I mean, every soul answers to God for what they do. Okay, you don't get to just be like, that wasn't me, that was my husband. Like, you didn't even look into it to find out if it was right, or maybe you did, and then you just went along anyway, hoping that he was gonna like protect you. It's like, what? That's so weird. I mean, this whole theme of the unbalanced submission to the authority in your life, if you're a woman, whether it's your father or then your, husband. And I'm not saying that women shouldn't, obey in a proper sense their husbands and their fathers, because that is good, it is biblical, but it's like it gets out of whack, and then it's like there's like this submission, it's the dominance, which is actually a result of the fall. Again, this is all in Mulieris Dignitatem. Pope John Paul II, he lays it out so beautifully about that verse in Genesis, I think it's chapter 3 verse 16, about the woman's, the man will seek to dominate the woman, and the woman's desire will be for her husband. And he explains that verse like I never heard it explained. It made so much sense. And it's like, that's the result of the fall, that the man will try to dominate the woman. He's saying that men and women were created equal to help each other, to obey and serve each other. It's not, they were on an equal footing. Yes, woman followed man. Some people argue that means woman is actually the crown of creation because she was the last final masterpiece of God's work. So, but like, where do you ever hear that in Tradland? So the whole thing built in.
That's beautiful.
But again, it's like, so we've become so used to the men saying, well, I'm the man, I get to dominate, I'm over you, you submit to me. It's almost like we need to make a distinction between like obedience, which is healthy and right, and submission, which is like this servile, somehow I am a second-class citizen and you're the first class because you're a man, so you just automatically were born into this and I will never attain it. And that's, John Paul II was saying that our work as men in this, the redemptive life is to work to that beginning that God made it to be, and not just staying here where it's fallen and concupiscent, because that is the manifestation of sin.
It's really like so many things with traditionalists, and I know I'm going to get in trouble for this, but again, it's like, I'm not going to call them Catholic. Like, at this point in time, I truly believe like they call themselves traditionalists, and so it's like, it's kind of like Lutherans, like, to me, that's what it is, because they're rejecting so much of this beauty that the church has to offer, and they just fundamentally, like, they don't understand fundamental basic things, and I didn't understand it either until I start reading, like, what does this scriptural passage mean? And I wanted to read this article because it just kind of shows the true meaning of the Bible verse of St. Paul. These verses that are so beautiful, and yet they're really abused by those in the traditionalist movement. Like so many good things that they simply take out of context, to fall in line with their own preferred agenda.
Right.
And St. Paul's words are used as a cudgel to beat down women in general. But, many of the wives and daughters in particular, depending on the father, for example, my dad didn't do that. My dad was pretty normal. But I know lots of dads who are very extreme. And like that man we were talking about who wouldn't even allow his daughters to change the little baby's diapers,
Yeah.
Anyway, the name of the article is Wives Be Subject to Your Husbands, and it was written by Father Ray Ryland. You can find it on Catholic Answers, and I'll send you the link, Laura, so that you can put it in the description
Cool.
of the video. But I'm reading not the whole thing, but quite a bit of it because it's just beautiful. So I'm just going to start here. While we're talking about potentially controversial passages in Scripture, let's add let's add another one that is widely ignored today. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 21 through 25. And actually, he doesn't have the verse 21 in here, but I wanted to read that because I think that's what you were talking about earlier, Laura. It's verse 21 is this is what he says before he says, wives, submit to your husbands. Be mutually submissive to each other out of reverence for Christ. So that's how it started. I had never really heard that one. Anyway, so this, by the way, is the most extensive passage on the marriage relationship in all of Scripture. Take 3 of those verses. Wives, be subject to your husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body, and is himself its Savior. As the church is subject to Christ, so let wives also be subject in everything to their husbands. Does this sound like the wife is reduced to a second-class citizen in the family? That's how some people interpret it. Remember, this is revelation of God's will for Christian married couples. We'd better take it seriously. But before we can do that, we have to understand it correctly. What does head mean? Let's start with the scriptural command that the husband is to be head of his wife. The Greek word used by the sacred writer is kephale, which literally means head. When we use the word head figuratively, we mean leader or chief or director, the one who has authority in a given situation or structure. In other words, the head is the boss. There are 7 passages in Paul's epistles in which kephale is used figuratively. 5 of them refer to Christ as head of the church. Here, kephale used figuratively means exalted originator and completer, source or beginning of completion, or one who brings fullness. There are other Greek words that mean boss in our sense of the term. None is used to describe Christ's relationship to the church. Only kephale is. 2 passages speak of the husband as kephale, head of the wife. 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 3, and Ephesians chapter 5, verse 23. Here the word kephale carries the same meaning in an analogous sense that it has in these passages in which it is applied to Christ. Paul often used the head-body metaphor to stress the unity of Christ in his church. In nature, of course, head and body are dependent on each other for their fullness. See in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 25 through 27, what Christ as kephale of the church does for her. Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, that he might present the church to himself in splendor, that she might be holy and without blemish. Christ gave himself up for the church to enable her to become all that God created her to be. Now look at what the husband's being kephale for his wife means. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Not many husbands are called upon to literally die for their wives, but all husbands are called by God to sacrificially serve their wives. It is clear from Scripture that the husband's being head of his wife does not mean he is to be boss or that he is to dominate his wife. Being head means giving his wife sensitive, intelligent leadership. But no, it's to be leadership that grows out of loving consultation between the spouses. As head, the husband provides for and cares for his wife and, of course, the children. He bears primary overall responsibility for the family. According to Scripture, there is only one way in which a husband can truly serve his wife as head. The head of every man is Christ. The head of a woman is her husband, and the head of Christ is God. In order to be truly head of his family, a husband must himself be submitted to Jesus Christ. His service as head consists above all in his responsibility to mediate the love of Jesus Christ to his wife and children. Equality between spouses. But if the husband is to be the head of the marriage, how can there be true equality between the spouses? For Christians, there is neither Jew nor Greek. There is neither slave nor free. There is neither male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. Galatians chapter 3, verse 28. In other words, human distinctions mean nothing, and yet husbands are called to be heads of their wives. How can this be? Let's start with a necessary distinction between something we call status and something we call subordination. Status is what we are eternally in the eyes of God. Status is what Paul has in mind when he rejects all human distinctions. That wives are told to be subject to their husbands has nothing, skipped over that, has nothing to do with their status. Subordination, on the other hand, refers to a role of function that God calls us to fulfill. Two persons can be absolutely equal in status, what they essentially are as persons, while one person plays a role of subordination to the other. In Scripture, status and subordination are two separate issues. The Bible does not draw any necessary connection between them. We are created in the image and likeness of God. The human family, therefore, is supposed to be modeled after the divine family, the Blessed Trinity. Think about the Trinity for a moment. God the Father has revealed that the Godhead is one God in three persons, all of whom are perfectly, eternally equal in divinity. God the Son is eternally equal to the Father, God from God, light from light, true God from true God, as we say in the Nicene Creed. Yet the Son is also subordinated to the Father. He is subject to the Father, according to 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 28. When all things are subjected to him, Christ, then the Son himself will also be subjected to him, the Father, who put all things under him, that God may be everything to everyone. So also the Holy Spirit, he is fully God, like the Father and the Son, and eternally equal to the Father and the Son. Yet in the drama of our redemption, the Holy Spirit is also subject to the Son. Thus, the Son and the Holy Spirit are simultaneously equal to the Father and subject to the Father. Yet their subordination to the Father, that is, the role they play in relation to the Father, in no way detracts from their status of equality with the Father. Likewise, in Christian marriage, the wife's role of subordination in no way detracts from her status of absolute God-given equality with her husband. Now go back to Ephesians chapter 5, verse 22 and read the other eye-opener. Wives, be subject to your husbands as to the Lord. Reading this verse causes some people to go into an orbit and denounce Paul as a woman hater. Those who have this response haven't an inkling of what Paul actually is saying. Moreover, they take the verse completely out of context. The opening line of the key New Testament passage about the relationship God intends to exist between husbands and wives is this. Husbands and wives should be subject to one another. The wife subjects herself to her husband by accepting his role as head. That is, she cooperates with him in filling that role of service to her and the children. The husband, on the other hand, subjects himself to his wife by accepting and doing his best to fulfill her needs for love and care, provision and order, day after day, so long as they both shall live. God intends that there should be mutual subjection of husbands and wives. Here is a whimsical example of how this works. The wife says to her husband, "Honey, I subject myself to your headship of service. Now please subject yourself to my need to have the garbage taken out and to have this dirty diaper changed." The wife's natural superiority. One final point. Why is the husband rather than the wife called to be head in the family? One obvious reason is that since the wife bears the children and takes the lead in their nurturing, the husband has more freedom to fill the role of head. Another reason is that in times past, at least, the greater physical strength of the man has better qualified him for services as head of his wife and family. But there's a deeper reason. A couple may choose to reject the whole concept of headship for the husband. They may simply affirm, as many couples today do affirm, that because we're both persons, we're equal and equal in our marriage. But the truth is that on the natural human level, what they are saying is false. On the natural level, husbands and wife are not truly equal. In any given culture, past or present, a wife may or may not have equal civil rights with her husband. But in the marriage itself, as wife and mother, the woman fills a role that is more central, more important to the spiritual and emotional life of the family than the role of the husband. He is very important, of course, but the wife's is more so. Thus, on the natural level, there is an inescapable inherent inequality between husband and wife within the marriage. Remember, we already have noted that in the eyes of God, there is perfect equality between the spouses. If spouses insist on their natural equality, they cannot truly share in that spousal complementarity that, as Pope John Paul II has so often reminded us, is God's plan for the marriage relationship. Only in true complementarity can husband and wife achieve true oneness. That's the fact. Now, allow me offer an opinion about headship and the natural inequality in marriage. This opinion is not specific teaching of the Catholic Church, but it is in full harmony with what the Church does teach about marriage. God bestows headship on the husband in order to bring the husband up, so to speak, to a position of full equality with his wife on the natural human level. The wife is called by God to share in bestowing headship on her husband. She does this by lovingly consenting to her husband's filling that role. She does this by helping him in every way she can to carry on his service of headship. Then, when they are truly equal on the natural level, they become capable of that complementarity that enables them to become one on the deepest level. This, in broad outline, is God's revealed plan for the Christian marriage relationship. And that's that. I mean, just blew my mind.
Wow.
What a beautiful description of the relationship that we're supposed to have as Catholics.
Well, again, it's based completely on love. Which
Yeah.
is God's vision anyway. I mean, when Jesus came, he replaced the 10 commandments with the 2 commandments that covered everything. It's like with those 2 commandments that you're loving God with all your heart and soul and your neighbor as yourself, you are just going to follow the law. You are going to do what God
That's
wills.
right.
And it's really that
Exactly.
simple. It's like if you are seeking to do always the most loving thing, how wonderful is that? How could you go wrong? Even if you were to somehow make a mistake, it would be completely well intentioned and you're open to God's moving in your life. So isn't he able to then redirect you because you're full of goodwill?
For sure. Yeah. No, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. Like, I think the fundamental piece that's missing and lacking is actual love for each other, which is not promoted. I mean, yeah, you rarely hear about the 2 greatest commandments. You hear about the 10 commandments, but you don't hear of the new covenant. Like, yeah, my mind is blown by all the things that I've been learning about the covenant. Scott Hahn has really opened my eyes. And then the same thing with the covenant of marriage. It's just so warped in these trad communities. And I'm really not sure what the answer is to changing that other than accepting what the popes have given us for the last 60 years.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a manifestation that when you stop growing with the church, you're stunted. So you don't have something that you should have, and this is just a sign of the incompleteness of it. Even the language that's common in trad circles of like the marriage contract, the marital debt. It's like you signed here, you owe me. It's like a business arrangement. It's like, wait a second.
Very transactional.
She's just an object, right?
Yeah.
Right.
For his gratification.
Right. And then your children are there as evidence that you're doing the right thing. So you can check those boxes.
Well, and then not only that, the husband's role is lowered to only a paycheck as well. So he's fulfilled his side of the bargain, by bringing home a paycheck. Yeah. So he's providing, and now her job is to provide for his every whim, his every need, and produce all of his children and be the good submissive wife. Yeah. So his job is done when he goes to work, and that's it.
I had a friend. I have a friend who was raised in a family where, I mean, just tragic. She said that, yes, the mother would be home with them all day, and she'd be making a list of every time they were naughty and putting it on the refrigerator. And then the dad generally came home from work pretty late, 8 o'clock sometimes. And he would come in, and she just said she was just terrified every time her dad came home. They would hear his truck from a few blocks away, and they would be terrified because what would happen is he'd come in, and I mean, this is how dysfunctional this relationship is between the couple, but also even, between the children and their parents. And he would come home, he'd look at the list, and he'd go, most of the time they were already in their rooms for the night, and he'd take his belt off and he would go beat them,
Oh my gosh.
beat the ones that were naughty. And she said he had this attitude like, yeah, of course he'd be mad because like, I've been at work all day making money to feed you, and like that was his job. And then the wife had him discipline the children when he got home. And so like, where is the love there at all?
Yeah.
Right.
There's none between the husband and wife. Like the wife who can just talk to her husband and be like, whoa, I had a rough day, like Johnny was doing this crazy thing and I disciplined him. And like, again, that's our job. And it, in this article it revealed that it's like our job is to raise and nurture our children. Like we're the ones educating them at home every day.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's rough, sometimes they do some crazy stuff that needs to be addressed, but like you don't write it on a list and keep it for your husband to come
No.
and
Yeah.
beat them. He hasn't been dealing with them all day, and then that's all they know of their father.
Yeah.
That he comes, like he's scary.
Yeah.
And it's like, and how did you not think that was dysfunctional as a couple? But see,
Yeah.
their relationship was dysfunctional. Like she says, she's like, there's no love for each other that she's ever seen.
Wow.
You know,
Totally
moms stay
based
home.
on justice and what's coming to you. And like, then you learn from your parental model that God is just waiting to smite you as soon as you do
Mhm.
something you shouldn't do. And yet
Right.
that poor, like, I love what you said, Veronica, about that's lowering men to a level that it's not even in accordance with their dignity. It's like, we're not sitting here saying, why doesn't my husband change a diaper? Like, why isn't that okay? Like, geez, doesn't he want to give me a break? It's like, it's not about giving me a break. It's about him integrating into family life. Like,
Right.
yes,
Yeah.
work often
Yeah.
requires that he's physically absent for most of the day. And when he comes home, he's coming home to his family. You're a parent 24/7. If you're a husband 24/7, you're a wife the same way. It's like you don't just check out, but you're in this together. And it's like, this should be a time where you're coming together. You've been expecting it joyfully all day. The kids should be excited to see their dad because mom didn't abdicate the role of disciplinarian to pin that on him so that the kids would fear and hate him.
So he's the bad guy, right?
Right.
Yeah.
It's like, no, that is a cop out. And yes,
And I
I
think
know
that
how
like
that happens.
like my friend was basically telling me like he was so much more than that and could have been so much more than that. And she said, but like they literally were like, they distinguished the roles, right? Like, this is what I do, this is what you do, and like, let's check the boxes instead of just being human and understanding the relationship and having love there.
Right.
Right.
Well, I mean, just a couple
Um,
experiences from my own life. Like my husband sometimes comes home from work and I'm like, man, our son was just like nuts today. I don't know what was going on. And I'm just kind of describing stuff. And he's like, he needs to spend some time with me. And he does. He acts out when he needs time with his dad. And so,
Right.
but my husband intuits that. And he's like, I'm here now. I'm going to make sure I spend some good time with the kids before they go to bed because this is all I have. So this is my
Right.
time with them. And my dad, my dad would work, every day, go to work, come home. He worked with a bunch of guys. Sometimes my mom would be like, you have a bunch of daughters. Like, you can't talk to them like they're guys at work. Okay. He's like, oh, sorry. Like he's learning about the sensitivity that he can tap into in himself in order to be kind and loving to his daughters. It's like we were we were there for a reason, and we were all called to kind of round each other out. You sand each other's rough edges, and you help each other grow in areas that you need growing in. And he learned that. He was a wonderful dad to daughters, and then he did get a son at the end. Woo! But still, it's like, hold on. I mean, that's just one example. That's like he took my mom's words to heart. It was like, oh yeah, like I can't just sling any old words around or behavior. Like I can't treat you like you're just any old person. Like I've got to know each individual in my family. I've got to be present to them. Like we just want to invite them into that experience. I don't think men should be shut out of that and feel like insecure because, well, that's not my job. I don't know how to do that. It's like, this is your role. This is my role. Like we make this family together. It doesn't have to be so distinct. I mean, one time I was at a friend's house, they were relative, and the wife was just so burdened and just running from thing to thing, and like she was exhausted, and there was still a bunch of stuff to be done. With the husband's over there kicking back, and just I looked over at him and I just couldn't help it. I said, "What are you doing? Don't you see she needs help?" And he's like, "Are there not divisions of labor in this house? I've done my work today. That's her work." And I was like, well, that's really kind. And I'm sure she felt loved and respected by you to hear that you told me that. And, that you're not going to move.
Wow.
I'm sorry. There's no clause in the marriage contract that says you get time off from being a husband and a father or a mother and a wife. It doesn't work like that.
Right. Or that your only job is, like Veronica said early, bringing home the bread, right? That's your job, and disciplining the kids. And the other thing, my friend said that every time he would be beating them, he's like, I do this because I love you. I have to discipline you. And it's like, again, just all this head trash that it gives the kids, but I just think that, the ultimate problem in the trad community is that they are totally missing the guidance of the church.
Oh yeah. Well, and like you can see that actually, like the further and the more these groups split up, the further away from the church they get, the more radical and extreme they become. Every single one of them.
These are huge issues people are dealing with all the time, and they don't know the broader world that's out there so often. It's like the truly Catholic world, because they're locked in this little box and told that there's nothing outside of this box. Just like the village, there's nothing out there but danger and fear and death. And maybe they're, the people telling them that are doing it for with a good intention, because they want to save them from, encountering liturgical abuse or heresy or lukewarm people. But it's like,
or let's rephrase that. Their determination of what heresy is.
Yes.
Not actual true heresy, but
right. Again, because this is all based on personal interpretation, because it's Protestant. And that's what Protestants do. Eventually, everybody boils down to their own church, because it's your judgment that determines that you're adhering to the society, or that you're being a sedevacantist, or that you're, not comfortable going to a diocesan church. You think only the fraternity is good enough or something. It's like, wait a second.
Yeah.
When were you given the right and the qualification to make these distinctions?
When did Christ say that all that matters is your preferences?
I mean, actually, I think he did. He actually said, "Lean not on your own understanding," is what it says in the Bible. So
I think so too.
Yeah,
I think he told us exactly what we need to know. That's right.
Awesome. Well, thank you, ladies, so much for your generous gift of time and your wisdom and experience that you shared. It's huge, and I hope this video will help a lot of people.
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks, Laura. Thanks for having us on.